Welcome to Three Siblings, a podcast about life after loss and grief. We're the three siblings, your hosts, Sunny, Tina, and Michelle. On this show, we retell our stories to shine a light on tough family situations to help our listeners with issues they may be facing. Let's get into it.
Hey everyone, this is Michelle. Thanks for tuning in today. For my point of view episode, I'd like to start with a quote from Martin Prechtel's book, The Smell of Rain on Dust, that has transformed my relationship with grief. Prechtel says, grief expressed out loud, whether in or out of character, unchoreographed and honest, for someone we have lost, or a country or a home we have lost, is in itself the greatest praise we could ever give them. Grief is praise because it is the natural way love honors what it misses. Now that 7 years have passed since the loss of my parents, I want this episode to be my current point of view and to re-examine my younger self through a lens of being slightly wiser and much more compassionate. I know that the young adult me did not fully process that losing my grandpa, then my father, then my mother, all in the span of 2 years would leave me deeply wounded and lost. I was not really taught how to grieve, especially the loss of those who seem like they had lives ahead of them still. I don't believe there's a proper path or way to grieve, but I do understand now that grief must be expressed. At the time, I tried to appear strong and unaffected, but I see I was going down a path of self-destruction that would ultimately take me to rock bottom where I would have to rebuild myself. When my grandpa passed away in 2015, I remember feeling so grateful for my father being there and guiding us through the process of losing a family member. I was at work in Houston when I got the call, and we immediately flew to China to prepare for the funeral service. Yaya's friends sat by his body day and night for days to be with him, and they left food and oranges out for his spirit. My father gave a beautiful speech at his service, and I remember them picking out little miniature objects to burn with his body to carry into the next life. I remember thinking it was funny how some of the objects were like a fake pack of cigarettes, a pack of cards to play poker, or a miniature air conditioner, the things that people valued there. It seemed to me that my father grieved in a way that celebrated my grandfather's life. He didn't cry as much as I thought he would, but I did see him cry, and my dad rarely cried. It felt like what I would consider the best death one could hope for. Yaya passed away in his 80s after living a full life, from poverty in China, marrying my wonderful grandma, having 3 kids, then moving to live in America and later being taken care of by his prodigal son, my father. Yaya was always a strong man, and I know he loved his life so much that he probably wasn't ready to leave yet. But still, I feel so lucky to have known him and to have been loved and cared for by him. A year later, my dad passed away. He was in a coma in the hospital for what felt like forever, and I remember desperately hoping he would wake up. I clung to the idea of a miracle, that he would wake up fully cognitive, though it's incredibly rare to come out of a coma unscathed. It was more likely if he did wake up, he would be in a vegetative state. Still, I hoped. I remember being there in the hospital alone with him, hearing the beeps of the machines keeping him alive. I remember singing a song to him I had wrote, hoping it would reach him. When Dad passed away in December of 2016, I also didn't know how to process it. To be honest, I don't remember much after him passing away. My memory knows that I flew back to Portland where I was living at the time, but I don't remember anything really. I remember wishing my dad was there to help me grieve his passing, which is ironic, but it was because he handled my grandpa's death so full of grace. I know that I went back to Portland and continued working, but eventually I bought a one-way ticket to Paris for that following summer with no plan to do anything except to get lost. I think that was my ticket to avoiding grief. It's funny because looking back, I thought it was possibly the best summer of my life. Yet when I look deeper, it was also probably one of the saddest and most self-destructive. Life can be such a paradox at times. I was a young girl on the precipice of drowning in grief, and the version of me I designed to escape that grief built a glamorous, carefree life. She walked along the Seine River while the sun didn't set until 11 p.m. in the Parisian summers. I wish I had just gone home and stayed with my family, but I couldn't. I was terrified of my mom and her depressive state, and I knew that we clashed often because both of us had terrible depression and anxiety. I avoided all of the hidden grief that was brewing in Texas. I often feel selfish for choosing to continue with my whims despite the tremendous amount of loss in my family, but I don't think I had the mental tools to deal with all that had happened. If I could redo my life, I would spend every moment with my parents, loving them and appreciating them. But also, a part of living this life requires us to be selfish and to explore our potential. So I want to give my past self grace for not knowing better while knowing that I now have a deep bond with my siblings and a relationship with them that is built on knowing what death can take away. Not everyone gets this chance, this insight, to love deeply knowing that death is always around the corner, that every moment is to be fully lived and savored. In the summer of 2017, I drove all my things down to Houston from Portland, then I flew to Paris. I think it was the first time in my life I was completely removed from everything I knew. I had a few mutual friends there, and I had studied a bit of French, but I felt like a stranger in a whole new world, a dream world. It was the perfect way to escape. You forget about your problems when you're learning how to converse in a new language, read street signs, take the metro, grocery shop, and settle into a whole new culture by yourself. Everything felt like a delicious challenge. I would wake up, open my door, and walk out from morning until night, following just my impulses. I had no one to answer to, and I could do whatever I wanted. I would sit out on the terrace of a cafe at night and write poetry, go to jazz clubs alone, smoke cigarettes on long walks at night passing the Louvre Pyramid. I met so many wonderful people I still consider friends to this day, and I learned something incredibly important about myself, that I could thrive in the unknown. In Paris, I visited a very special place that no longer exists called the Seymour Projects. It was an interactive space for mindfulness where you went through different rooms and did different small activities that promoted being in touch with yourself. One of the activities was to write a letter to someone, and they would mail the letter for you anywhere in the world to that person. I wrote a letter to my mom, telling her how I wished she and I could be in Paris together, having fun, but I knew that her depression was bad and that I understood that it made it hard for her to do things. After 3 months in Paris, my tourist visa expired and I knew it was time to go home. When I got back to Houston, I had no plan yet. I had moved all my things back into my mom's house. I remember being so excited about Paris and telling her I wanted to move there. And a part of me wonders if me telling her that I wanted to move out of this country made her more depressed. The night before she died, I saw a psychic on a whim. That psychic gave me some incense to burn at home, so when I got home, I went into my mom's room where she was laying in the dark and asked her if I could burn it. She said no, that it would bring bad energy into the house. I said, okay, I love you. Went upstairs and I burned the incense anyways. She was gone the next morning. I still think about that to this day. What if I hadn't burned the incense? Would she still be here? The thing about losing someone to suicide is that the brain, with fine fingers, begins to comb over every interaction to figure out what we could have done to prevent the suicide. It was as if there was no way to escape blaming myself. I blamed myself for years, imprisoned myself in a shroud of shame. I knew that blaming myself was irrational, but I couldn't help but carry around an enormous amount of guilt for not being the best daughter. I was mean, rude, and distant when I could have been tender, appreciative, and affectionate towards my parents, who tried to give me everything, especially my mother. Tina has said to me to remember the good times, to remember the times we laughed together as a family. I have to admit, it took years for me to even begin to remember the good times again. But through switching my perspective, I began to remember the times I was a good daughter, when I showed my love or tried to make them proud. Today, I've gotten to a point where shame and guilt have transformed into a forgiveness of myself and a knowing that an adolescent's relationship with a parent will oftentimes be turbulent no matter the circumstances. I sometimes see people arguing with their siblings, their parents, and it took me a long time to not wince in pain, to shout out loud, "They might die. Stop this pettiness." It's a privilege in this life to have conflict with someone living. It's truly a gift. I'm also grateful to have had Tina and Sunny to share these fears with. Confessions of when we were mean and how much we regret it. When others may have judged me and called me selfish, my siblings have only accepted and understood me from my past because they understood. And this love and acceptance goes both ways. These vulnerable conversations with the two people who have gone through the same thing have healed me more than anything else. I remember there was a wave of grief brewing in my heart about 2 years ago, and I was on the phone with Tina and Sunny. Due to the complex nature of my mom's death and the family problems, none of her friends really reached out to us or stayed in contact with us. I remember admitting to Tina and Sunny that I sometimes think that her friends blamed us for her suicide, and that's why they don't speak to us. I will never forget the moment when Sunny admitted he felt the same way. Because I wasn't alone, that weight suddenly lifted. And Tina, being probably the strongest of us three, said there's no way that it was the truth and that we don't need to believe that anymore. That conversation still sticks with me to this day because it felt like a huge step forward in expressing not only our grief, but our deepest fears. It brought light into some darkness we have been carrying for years. I have found that there is no singular emotion tied to grief. It is not just sadness. There are complex emotions without given names. There are times when I felt fine, even manically happy, but I look back and realize for a majority of the years after, I was just numbing myself. I distracted myself with alcohol, toxic relationships, a thirst for my career, anything that would keep my mind off the fact that I had experienced trauma. I don't want to go off too long on a tangent about the ways I numb myself, but I do want to say that unhealed trauma led me to try to heal external things in life that could not be healed. I chased ambition and toxic people and situations with a sick thirst, and it just brought me more trauma. Toxic relationships are one of the most addictive experiences life has to offer, an endless roller coaster of ups and downs. They are an incredibly difficult situation to leave. Today in 2023, I feel peace in my life and in my heart and in my mind. It has taken me a long journey of pain, messing up, and learning how to get here. It has also taken the support and love of others who know how to love unconditionally to keep me afloat and to continue to believe my life is worth living. Deep down inside, the unhealed version of me just knew there had to be more to life than just carrying around shame, guilt, and unexpressed grief. One day, I was looking in the mirror after my dad passed, and I saw him in me so clearly. I was always told I looked just like him. I feel my mom and dad as a part of me, in the way I do things, the way I learn, my passions, my adventurous side. I realize that I am the blood and body of my parents and their parents and all our ancestors. I want to shape and make decisions in my life to be filled with a balance of experience, joy, love, and connection, so that it honors their spirits, so that even though their life was cut short, they can still live through me. I know I've made mistakes, but learning to forgive myself and make better decisions has been crucial to my healing and reaching a place of peace and stability. For my mother and father, who I know are still by me in spirit, I honor you and I love you. For my friends who have been there for me, I honor you and I love you. And for my siblings who I cherish so much, I honor you and I love you. This is the Three Siblings. Thank you for tuning in to the Three Siblings. We know we discuss some really tough topics on the show, so we want to make sure you've got the resources you need if you're going through a tough time. Dialing 988 will bring you to a suicide and crisis phone line. If you want to support the work we're doing on the show, the best thing to do is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It might help someone else who needs to hear this and find this show. You can also follow us on social media at Three Siblings Podcast on Instagram and at Siblings Podcast on Twitter. We are so excited to share more stories with you in our next episode.